Let's see, moving down here. Oh, well, this is a top fan, so we absolutely have to answer this one from Cameron C. Smith with the top fan star, and that's a cool thing to have. Hey, Cameron, how are you? He's asking, Bill, how in the hell were the rebels in The Last Jedi planning on dropping bombs onto a First Order dreadnought in space? Also, have you noticed the name for the courageous male figure is one letter away from being Pooh? Yeah, I've noticed that. Poe, I'm not quite so upset about Poe Dameron, only because I'm utterly convinced that George Lucas names his characters by just random gibberish. I mean, I think if I take a second to relax, I'm sure I can get into that kind of mode. Like, let's see, Ben Vartan and Laru Podim and Datui Vlor. Yeah, you get the idea. Just gibberish. But I actually like the character of Poe Dameron, strangely enough, because he's a heroic, strong male fighter pilot. We're not going to open up that can of worms, at least not today anyway, on what Star Wars, what the social justice warriors have inflicted on Star Wars. But they killed it, which is, it's a tough thing to kill, but they pretty much did. So I'm very, very curious to see what's going to happen with the ninth movie. My hope is that it's going to be like the ending of the Bob Newhart show, where he's the second Bob Newhart show, where he's running the country inn in Vermont. And the final episode, he wakes up and he's back in bed with Suzanne Pleshette from his previous series and said the whole thing was just a terrible dream. That would be cool. And that was probably the most clever piece of TV writing I've ever seen. I remember it was really, really funny. There are, I think the bigger issue, Cameron, is the business about dropping bombs onto a dreadnought in space. Now, that bothers some people, and it doesn't bother others, but the ones that it bothers are the ones that these people should be showing a little more respect to. I mean, everybody I know who saw that movie, everybody I know just, what? And this is what's unusual about it. This is what actually I think could become an interesting discussion for a moment here. So, for those of you that haven't seen it, and if you haven't, don't be in any particular hurry to. But at the opening scene in the last Star Wars movie, in The Last Jedi, they've got fighter screen going in, and they're trying to protect these bombers, and these bombers are coming in over a spaceship. And they open bomb bay doors, and round bombs just drop out. They just drop down onto the spaceship. Now, what's interesting to me is that I know every single person that I was with and everybody I've ever talked to who saw that just went, come on. But no one ever went, come on, when you see this starfighter banking and turning between these laser cannons going in. And all of those aerodynamic flight models are completely as ridiculous as having, gravity-fed bombs. So why does one work and the other one not? That's the interesting question, I think. I think it's got to do with, maybe it's just got to do with pushing your luck, Cameron? I mean, we expect space fighters, which I personally don't believe will ever exist, certainly not in the form that you see them now. We expect space fighters to behave like fighter airplanes, and clearly, without question, the original Star Wars movie and everything that followed was, and Star Citizen 2 for that matter, is pretty much set in World War II. You've got manned turrets, you've got engagement ranges of a mile, maybe usually less. You've got humans doing pretty much everything, including targeting weapon systems and stuff like that. I mean, Luke never turned on his smart bomb and let the optically guided, photon bomb take out the Death Star with impunity from, 30 miles away. So there's a lot of it that we expect to believe, and we don't really understand enough about how things move in space to be terribly offended by the starfighters. In fact, you have the starfighters, the X-wings have to do. They have to do what they do. Because if they don't, it's something else. So Star Wars, as many people have obviously mentioned since it came out, it's science fantasy. But it is interesting to me that we'll buy the spaceships and we'll buy the banking and turning, we'll buy visible laser bolts, we'll buy visible laser bolts that appear to be moving slower than the speed of sound, if I'm any kind of a guess at all, and we don't buy these bombs coming out of this thing. And I think it's because you push, I think you just pushed your luck. You went too far with it. And it's lazy. Everything about that movie is lazy. And everything after Empire Strikes Back is lazy, progressively lazier. And lazy writing is, that's like the unforgivable sin to me. I don't like writers who write about things they don't know about. That's usually pretty obvious, but when you're just so lazy that you just do things like that, it's just very hard. It's very hard for a guy like me not to feel just a lot of contempt for that. Putting aside how much money they make doing it. Eric Blake says Rogue One was amazing. Rogue One was amazing. I thought Rogue One was the best Star Wars movie since Empire Strikes Back. Rogue One was terrific. Rogue One was gritty and it was meaningful. It had an interesting plot. It had a great plot, as a matter of fact, and can show what could have been done. I thought Solo could have been a good movie if they only found a guy who somewhat resembled a young Harrison Ford instead of a young Jack Black. But anyway, so it doesn't have to be lazy. The script, I thought the script for Rogue One was really, really excellent. And the idea that the designer of the Death Star put that fatal flaw in there on purpose is one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest payoffs of a setup in film history. It took practically half a century to pay off that there's a little vent here that goes directly to the core. Isn't that convenient? Well, it turns out that kind of going back and sketching things in is just tremendous. DCG44S cuts right to the chase. This is the answer. He says, Starfighter's maneuvering is entertaining and exciting, so we accept it, dropping bombs or not. I think that's a lot of it. And I also think, too, to some degree, that the dropping of the bombs thing is still, the political correctness of that scene kind of pulls you out of it. It's just lazy. Now, the one thing I've been since I don't get to pick the questions, and I'm glad I don't, so it's not like I decided to wander back into this territory somebody asked. So I was looking a lot at the message boards for months and months after that movie came out, because Star Wars is post-Christian American religion, and the social justice warriors have destroyed that religion, and there's a lot of angry people about that. And one of the things they're most angry about is, aside from the obvious storytelling catastrophe, is how lazy writers have introduced things which they think are just a gimmick, like a plot device, but they're so lazy and they're so stupid when it comes to the Star Wars franchise that they do things that they think look cool, and in fact do look cool, but they don't make any sense. And to have this happen this way, you have to it undoes the entire pre-existing universe. And the example of that, of course, is when she engages the hyperspace drive and cuts through the entire Imperial fleet. It's a spectacular visual. It's just breathtaking visual, and it's a clever idea. But as many people pointed out, well, if that's all it takes to cut right through this gigantic, enormous dreadnought, then why don't we just put a hyperdrive on a droid and have it go right through? In other words, if you can use the hyperdrive as a kind of a hyperspace knife to cut through anything in its way, the fans were saying, well, what's the point of making a run on the Death Star? What's the point? What's the point of Poe Dameron doing all these dogfights? What's the point of them getting in the dogfights in Return of the Jedi? And you know, why? If it turns out that you can do that, then nothing else makes sense. And this is the thing that's driving the fans crazy, is that the film was not just bad, it was so lazy that it undid the rules of the universe. You can't just go in there and change the rules of the universe like that. I have to stop for a second because Cody MacArthur-Fett writes, here's some, I'm just looking at them, Bastilla Shan, Karth Onasi, Jolie Bindo, Mission Vow, Zalbar, M4, HK47. Yeah. I don't know whether those are real names or not. It wouldn't surprise me, but that's also lazy, I think. You know, the whole thing is, you have to wonder if it's intentional. To some degree, without question, the politics are intentional. And there's no question that Kathleen Kennedy and that director sat there and just, you know, over how they were going to make a really different kind of Star Wars. But I don't think, it's hard for me to imagine that either one of them understood how much damage they were doing to the cash cow, to the pop culture cash cow. It's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in total revenue in terms of marketing and merchandise and stuff. And they basically drove a stake through it. And they did it in such a way that made the fans not just hate them, but hate what the film has become. It's like The Simpsons. I mean, I stopped The Simpsons between episodes, seasons 3 and 10, let's say, was just nonstop brilliant. Every single show just crazy good. And then they started getting a lot more spotty, and that show ended with the episode where Principal Skinner turns out not to be Principal Skinner. That was the end of that show. It was another great example of lazy writing that just undermined the entire structure retroactively. A lot of fans of The Simpsons said, you know, in fact, Harry Shearer said this. I think we've talked about this before. Harry Shearer does the voice of Principal Skinner, among others, said you can't disrespect the fans this way. You can't introduce a character and have people grow to love the guy over 10 years and then suddenly tell you that everything he is a fraud. It's just you can't do it, but they did it, and that was it. But anyway, for the last 15, 20 years now, 20 almost, certainly 15 years, the show is not just bad, it's unwatchably bad. Watching The Simpsons for the last 15 years or 20 years is like, it's like watching a favorite relative dying in a hospital. It's unbearable. It's unbearable. It's just unbearably bad. You'd have, Homer would say something and Moe would appear outside the window to deliver one line, no explanation, nothing, just Moe's line, and then he's gone. Lazy, 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 lazy. And there's no excuse for lazy writing. I did a pitch for the whole video game thing, and I was basically went in front of an audience, and I opened like this. I said, how many of you out there in the audience have ever been hypnotized? I mean, all the way hypnotized, so that you were receptive to hypnotic suggestions and stuff. And I think 2 people in the crowd of 80 said they'd been hypnotized. And I said, well, I'm sorry to be the guy to inform you of this, but you've all been hypnotized. You've all been hypnotized many, many times, thousands of times. Furthermore, you've paid people to hypnotize you. And furthermore, you've paid people to hypnotize you with values that are pretty much the antithesis of everything you believe in, because when you go to a movie, you're hypnotized. Without question, you're hypnotized. You sit there for 2 hours, completely immobile, staring at this world that you're in. And Jeremy pointed out, and it's just worth, saying again and again and again. You can be in there on a Saturday afternoon with popcorn in your lap and a drink, and you got your girl next to you, and you're watching the matinee of the latest slasher movie, and the guy jumps out of the dark when the knife flashes, and you leap out of your chair, and you know that you're not in that room, and you know that there are no such thing as horror slashers. You know all of this. It doesn't matter. You buy it because your defenses are down. You put your defenses down on purpose. It's the willful suspension of disbelief. I'm going to give myself over to this experience, and if I can shut my consciousness down and let that hypnosis take effect, then essentially I can hypnotize myself into being in the movie, which is what the goal is, and that's also why the worst thing you can do was a great example, actually, Cameron, the bombs. The worst thing you can do is do something so lazy that you pull it. We say you get pulled out of the movie. This thing pulled me out of the movie. It's a great expression for what's going on. It basically is so offensive to your conscious mind, which is taking a break, and relaxing and enjoying the movie. Your subconscious mind is in complete control on these things. You're just soaking it up. It's going right to your brainstem. And then something so ridiculous happens that it essentially is like a smack on your face, and your consciousness comes back, and you're not in the movie anymore. Now I'm sitting in a theater looking at this. And, the classic example is there's this slasher film, and there's some 17-year-old, and she's in her bra and panties, and she's, and all of her friends have been killed by a slasher, and she hears something, smashing sound down in the basement, and she decides, maybe I should take this rickety flashlight with the weak batteries and go down there and see what's going on. And just like, okay, I'm done. If that's the best you can do, I'm out. There's no way anybody would do that. No way, anyway, under any circumstances. And so I'm out of the movie now. And you can get me back in the movie, but once you've done that, you've really screwed the pooch. There's really no excuse for it. It really is amazing how much an audience brings to the theater. I mean, they're really bringing an awful lot. And as one of these writing teachers pointed out, a book was called Story, I think. He said, not only do they bring the suspension of disbelief and a willingness to ride on this train with you, no matter how silly it may be, he says they're also incredibly smart, because their subconscious minds, our subconscious minds, while we're watching movies, are working on the problem. Who done it? In a murder mystery, who done it? And can you see it coming? And are you preparing for the twist? That's why it's so hard to write a murder mystery these days. Everybody knows there's going to be a twist, so now I guess the only twist is to not have a twist. But in any event, as this author points out, a bad movie writer, a bad screenplay writer, will spend months, if not years, writing a screenplay that an audience member subconsciously decodes in 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It's the secretary, not the secretary, the guy next to her, the guy who's super friendly at the water cooler. He's the guy who did it, and that's what we do. We just watch it and decode it and stuff. But the point is, your defenses are down, and you put them down intentionally. Screens are down, shields are down, and all of that message comes in. We soak it up. Just soak it up. It's a great experience. Natasha and I are going to see a movie right after this, as a matter of fact. I'm going to go see Bohemian Rhapsody, which looks very, very good. Because they went to the trouble, speaking of lazy, I've not seen the movie, but based on the trailer, they've gone to the trouble to make this actor look enough like and sound enough like, and the scenes at Wembley and so on, all of them together took a lot of effort to convince you that this is in fact exactly how you remember it. And you therefore have a memory of seeing the real Freddie Mercury, and all of the props and all of the costumes and everything's exactly the way you remember it, and you just put this guy into the movie, and when you're watching the movie, it's hard to remember what Freddie Mercury really looked like, because they spent so much trouble. Steve Darrow says the cups on the piano are positioned exactly the way they were in the real movies. These are concert footage. This is the difference between good filmmaking and bad filmmaking. good filmmakers sweat every single detail, and bad filmmakers say, I just drop bombs. Yeah, bombs don't really fall through space. Those idiots, they'll never get it. It's laziness, and it's a lack of respect for the audience. It's an even greater sin, is just lack of respect for the audience, and boom. So there you go. Let's see, moving on.